Last week, I received a cease and desist letter from Turning Point. This is the first step in a lawsuit. If I post this video, Turning Point will likely sue me and try to destroy my life. I have a choice to make. I can speak the truth, but it will cost me everything I have. The corrupt Turning Point executives have forgotten something. In 1941, Pearl Harbor was attacked by Japan. Hundreds of Japanese planes destroyed much of the U.S. fleet and the planes on the ground. The attack was such a surprise, most U.S. planes on the island were not able to take off. But a handful of brave U.S. pilots, without orders, jumped in their planes, managed to take off, and engage with the enemy. One of them, Philip Rasmussen, was still in his pajamas. This is how he describes the attack in his own words. "I was in my pajamas, and I yelled down the hallway that we were being attacked by the Japanese. And I ran to my room, and I strapped a webbed belt around my waist and a .45 caliber pistol in my holster that was on this belt, and put on a pair of shoes and ran for the flight line." A handful of U.S. pilots faced off against hundreds of Japanese planes. That is courage under fire. And they kept Pearl Harbor from being even worse. 2,403 Americans died in the attack on Pearl Harbor. Being brave is part of what it means to be an American. That is something that Charlie Kirk understood, and it's something that I try to live up to. I owe it to those brave Americans who gave their lives. So I have one message for all you patriots out there. It's time to fly. I believe what is going on at Turning Point is so much worse than anything I've talked about so far. It is so bad that it would implicate the entire leadership at Turning Point, and it has to do with ballot harvesting. I want to start by addressing some criticism. Since I started posting videos about financial irregularities at Turning Point, I have been viciously attacked. One of these people is a lawyer named Robert Barnes.
It says, any comment on the financial fraud that Wolves and Finance has pointed out? I know your answer to this, Robert.
Wolves and Finance is a big fat fraud. He's a joke. He's a disgrace. He's a liar. Liar about the records at TPUSA. He falsely stated that the TPUSAs didn't have an address at a place, basically a mail drop at a location. He was lying about it. It was right there. It's like, oh, I came to the mall and there's nothing here. It must be totally fake business. Everybody uses mail drops for the most part. And if you're TPUSA, you have very good security reasons for doing so. And he just lied about it. Wolves in Finance, fraud, fake, phony. That's all he is. That's all he's ever going to be. He lied about how tax law works. He lied about how charitable law works. He lied about what TPU. He was like, look at this TP Action 2024 has made a bunch of money. Maybe they made it in secret from Charlie Kirk. It was their get out the vote operation for 2024, you nitwit. I mean, he just lied about every basic thing. Wolves in Finance, big fat fraud. He wants to get into the clickbait whore world with Candace Owens, who's the queen of the brothel there. And that's all he did well, and that's the only thing he did right.
Let me tell you what I think of Robert Barnes. I actually really like the guy. I've been a fan of his for a long time. He's a lawyer, he's an expert on constitutional law, and you have to respect that. That clip was from the Viva Frei podcast, which is a podcast that Robert Barnes is on a lot. I also really like Viva Frei. Viva Frei is one of the few podcasters that is brave enough to accurately cover the pipe bomber story, which is something I care a lot about. Robert Barnes also has a long resume in his legal work, including working on the Alex Jones defamation lawsuits, the Kyle Rittenhouse case, and the Amish farmers who refused USDA inspection. So he's obviously a really good lawyer. But more than that, he's just a really likable person. Do you know anyone like this? He's one of these guys, you cannot help but like him. I know that he's going around saying all these mean and horrible things about me, but I still like the guy. I can't help it. He's just a likable person. Now, Obviously, he's wrong about me. Anyone who has seen my videos knows he's clearly misrepresenting what I'm saying. But I'm not going to hold that against him. Everyone is allowed to have a bad take once in a while. I'm not going to let it bother me. He's allowed to have his own opinion. What he's not allowed to do is argue with the facts. Robert Barnes went on a podcast called Paramount Tactical, and they discussed a letter that was allegedly sent from the IRS to Turning Point.
All right, so that is just kind of the tip of the iceberg as far as the allegations. I know that Wolves and Finances have kind of brought to the fore against TPUSA. And Robert, I know I actually got some of the documents, the letter from the IRS to Erica Kirk and TPUSA that talks about what their situation is as regards to the IRS.
This letter has been floating around and reported on by mainstream news outlets like CBS. Except the letter itself has never been shown until Paramount Tactical's podcast. In fact, I'm guessing he was not supposed to show this to his audience because it is quite shocking. It is a 2-page letter on Department of the Treasury letterhead. It says it is responding to a request from Erica Kirk. It says, 1, there is no IRS investigation currently underway on Turning Point. 2, all 4 990 forms were filed by May 15th, 2025. 3, the next year's forms will be filed by May 15th, 2026. The letter is signed by Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Paramount Tactical is presenting this letter as some kind of evidence that there is no fraud at Turning Point. That is ridiculous for a number of reasons. We all know this because all of us deal with the IRS. We all know this is not normal behavior. Have any of you ever received a letter from the IRS saying, just letting you know, we're not doing an investigation on you? No, of course you have not, because the IRS does not do this. And it's not coming from the IRS. The letter is signed by the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent. To me, this looks more like a political favor to Donald Trump's personal friends than a legitimate IRS communication. Second, the wording in this letter does not mean anything. Just because the IRS is not investigating does not mean there is no fraud going on. This does not mean that donors cannot sue Turning Point to get their money back. This does not mean that state attorney generals cannot file criminal charges against Turning Point executives. This letter does not disprove my concerns about their finances. And what is this? What is this? At the top of the page, someone has crossed out Mrs. Kirk and wrote in Erica. It looks like someone is proofreading Scott Bessent's letter. Who could that be? I have reviewed so many White House documents, and in my opinion, that handwriting looks like it was written by Donald Trump. If you compare it to other samples of his writing, he does a consistent method where he writes a name dash, name dash, name dash. The K is very much like this K. The E is written the same way as this W. This handwriting looks like it belongs to Donald Trump. This letter does not look like it came from the IRS. It looks like it came from the President of the United States. Do you understand what this means? This is the only document the Democrats need to impeach President Trump. This looks like the president's handwriting on official letterhead of him interfering in an IRS investigation of his personal friends. Let me remind you of Richard Nixon. Nixon faced impeachment charges for interfering with the FBI investigation into the Watergate scandal. The main evidence was secret tape recordings of conversations in the Oval Office. Donald Trump is doing the same thing with the IRS investigation, but this time we have what looks like his handwriting on official letterhead. It looks like the White House is now part of the cover-up at Turning Point. Let me give some free accounting advice to Donald Trump. You get this one for free, Donald. Stop writing letters like this. Why isn't he distancing himself from this scandal? I highly doubt that Donald Trump was aware of what Tyler Boyer was doing behind the scenes. But now with this letter, Donald Trump looks like he's getting involved. And I'm saying this as someone who likes Donald Trump, and this letter deeply bothers me. People have a right to be upset about this. Turning Point has been raising millions of dollars from donations. Most people don't know what has been happening with the donations. I received a message from someone named Margaret. Like many other people, she donated money to Turning Point USA because she was moved by Charlie Kirk's death. She was told if she gave a donation that she would receive a hat as part of their fundraising effort. Here's the message. Thank you for your contribution to Turning Point USA with the official Turning Point email address. And it says, shipping of your hat could take up to 10 to 12 weeks. She donated on September 16th. 12 weeks would have been the second week in December. Margaret has never received a hat. Instead, she received this card with a rubber bracelet. They are sending bracelets to people instead of the hat they promised. And this is not an isolated incident. Here is a Facebook post. Made a $25 donation to TPUSA back in September that was supposed to come with a 47 hat free for making the donation. Never got hat. Tried texting them and calling them several times and have not gotten response. Did get one response from someone named Anika, who said she had no record of the transaction. Have sent them copies of my receipt with no response. Called and left my name and contact info on their voicemail because they never answer the phone and they don't even call you back. Loved Charlie Kirk and watched him religiously, but this has totally disappointed me. Will call my bank and see if I can get reimbursed for the donation. And the replies are full of comments saying the same thing. All I got was a bracelet. We got a bracelet, no hat as promised. Got a cheap rubber band bracelet and no hat. That's a big way to turn people away, just make false promises. Same thing happened to my husband, no hat, gave a donation back in September. And it goes on and on and on. People need to realize what Turning Point has been doing to get donations since Charlie Kirk's death. They are lying to people to get their money and then sending them rubber bracelets. Let's look at the big picture. When someone gives money to Turning Point USA, what do they think they are giving money to? Most people think they're giving money to campus events, like what Charlie Kirk did. He would go to college campuses and answer questions. This is such a good nonprofit idea. Everyone supports that idea. Everyone knows that there is a major problem in the United States with college campuses. We have professors teaching communism and woke ideas in the classroom. How do we fix this? One way is what Charlie Kirk was doing. He was creating spaces on college campuses where students could talk about capitalism and free markets. He was allowing free speech where people could make fun of being woke. Everyone likes this idea. Everyone wants more of this. If this was all Turning Point was doing, no one would have a problem with it. What people are now realizing from Turning Point's financial information is that they are involved in a whole lot more. Let us look again at the four nonprofit companies. We have Turning Point USA, Turning Point Action, Turning Point Endowment, and America's Turning Point. Three of these companies are 501c3 organizations. Turning Point Action is a 501c4. The difference is that a 501c3 is not allowed to participate in political activity. A 501c4 can participate in no more than 50% political activity. And then there is also Turning Point PAC, which is 100% political activity. Now, I have seen arguments from people claiming that this is normal. They say it is normal for nonprofits to have multiple different companies. Not like this, it's not. Do not let people gaslight you about what's going on here. Let me explain what is unusual. You would normally create different shell companies for different types of activities. For instance, Turning Point Endowment is for their investments. That's clearly a different type of activity. It gets its own company. That makes sense. Turning Point Action is a 501c4. That's a different type of activity, so it gets its own company. What is this? Why is America's Turning Point separate? The company descriptions on the 990 form are very similar. It's basically education for young people. So why are these two different companies? The only major difference that I see is that Charlie Kirk managed Turning Point USA and Tyler Boyer managed America's Turning Point. So in a way, America's Turning Point existed to give Charlie Kirk plausible deniability. It gave Tyler Boyer his own 501c3 where he could do whatever he wanted, and Charlie Kirk would not necessarily know about it. This is explained in the fine print of the 990 form for Turning Point USA, which says, Turning Point USA's other educational programs include campus leadership programs, which are hosted by Turning Point USA's related entity, America's Turning Point, with grants totaling $8.6 million. So what is Tyler Boyer doing with these students? It sounds like this leadership program is a pipeline for these students to go work for Tyler Boyer. I wonder what these students are doing that costs $8.6 million. We're going to get into that in a minute. The other obvious question for most people is, how does Turning Point get involved in so much political activity? The only companies that are allowed to do political activity are up to 50% of Turning Point Action and Turning Point PAC. What happens in the real world is that a lot of 501c3s will perform what they call get out the vote efforts, or voter education. This is defined in Treasury Regulation 1.527-6B5. Get out the vote campaigns must not be specifically identified by the organization with any candidate or political party. As long as these are nonpartisan activities, they are considered not political, and that is the loophole that is allowed for a 501c3. This would include things like signing people up for new voter registration. But you cannot be pushing for Republican or Democrat. It has to be completely nonpartisan. Here's the problem. Turning Point USA is a 501c3. They are supposed to be non-political. But then we see Erica Kirk endorsing J.D. Vance for president.
We're going to ensure that President Trump has Congress for all 4 years. We are going to get my husband's friend, J.D. Vance, elected for 48 in the most resounding way possible.
This is at America Fest, Turning Point USA's largest event, with the CEO in a flashy pantsuit giving a speech endorsing a political candidate. This is strictly forbidden under the law for a 501c3. You cannot endorse political candidates. That is political activity. In my opinion, what Erica Kirk just did was illegal. This is effectively using their tax-exempt donations to create a campaign commercial for J.D. Vance. And before you say, well, maybe it was paid for by one of the other companies that allow political activity. No, no, no. It says Turning Point USA behind her head during the speech. The tickets for the event were sent out from Turning Point USA. The fact page for the event is hosted at tpusa.com, and at the bottom of the webpage it explicitly says, Turning Point USA is a 501c3. It looks to me like the executives at Turning Point are playing pretty fast and loose with the laws concerning 501c3s. Remember why this is important. A 501c3 is tax exempt, which is a tax subsidy. You are paying more in taxes so that they do not have to. So, is it fair that Democrats are paying taxes that fund a campaign commercial for J.D. Vance? This is so unjust, which is why there are so many laws against what Erica Kirk just did. If she wants to endorse a candidate, that's fine, but she needs to pay for it out of Turning Point PAC. I'm going to give you the exact wording from IRS Revenue Rule 2007-41. A 501c3 does not participate in or intervene in, including the publishing or distributing of statements, any political campaign on behalf of or in opposition to any candidate for public office. That seems pretty clear that Erica Kirk's statement was illegal. So the only nonprofit that is supposed to do political activity is the 501c4 Turning Point Action. There is a special section on their 990 form where they are supposed to list out the political activity they are engaged in, Schedule C. Now, everyone should go check out Schedule C for Turning Point Action because it is quite shocking. For FY24, on line 2, they listed that they spent $637,500 on political campaign activity expenditures. Now just let that sink in for a moment. Out of Turning Point Action's $21 million budget, they only spent 3% on political activity. Now, just from what you know about what Turning Point Action does that seem right to you? Now, they actually provide a description of what the $637,500 was spent on. They claim it was specifically political campaign activities include event expense. So they spent this money on some kind of event. I'm guessing it was a campaign rally for Donald Trump. And they are claiming that this is the only thing that Turning Point Action does that qualifies as political activity. All of the rest of the millions of dollars that they have spent was not for political activity. I have a really hard time believing that. We're going to take a closer look. If Turning Point Action spent more than 3% of their budget on political activity, that means they lied to the IRS and they lied to their donors, and that is fraud. This would be an omission of potentially taxable income. So what I want to do is an audit. We're going to do an audit right here, right now, and you people on the internet can help me do it. We're going to look at what Turning Point Action actually does in real life. And then we are going to compare that to what they are reporting in their financials. If it looks like their political activity exceeds 3%, that means that they are lying. So to start out with, on their website, tpaction.com, there's an entire page dedicated to ballot harvesting. It says, Turning Point Action's Chase the Vote initiative. They say, TP Action chased ballots in Arizona, Georgia, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Nevada. They describe this as, the radical left was beating us in the ballot game. In 2024, Turning Point Action launched the first and most robust conservative ballot operation. So they are specifically saying on the website that this is partisan. It should not qualify as a nonpartisan get-out-the-vote effort. It is extremely partisan. So why are the expenses for this not listed on the 990 form? This Chase the Vote initiative sounds like ballot harvesting. People call this different names. Ballot harvesting, ballot chasing, door knocking, whatever you call it. It involves going to someone's door and getting their ballot. Ballot harvesting is not illegal as long as they follow the rules. Every state has different election laws. For instance, in Arizona, ballot harvesting is only allowed for immediate family members and caregivers. For the sake of this video, we're going to assume that Turning Point is doing ballot harvesting correctly. I'm just going to assume that they hired all of these people to harvest ballots only for their immediate family members. I know that is a massive assumption, but we're going to start there. My problem is not the ballot harvesting. The problem is how are they paying for the ballot harvesting? Are they paying for it out of companies that are not supposed to be doing political activity and then not reporting it to the IRS? Here's a post by Tyler Boyer. Another day, another group of dozens of full-time ballot chasers being trained into the field. I wonder how they are paying for all of this. Here's another post by Ashley on X.com. Ballot chasing in Arizona with TP Action. Make America Great Again, #Trump 2024. In the photograph, they are wearing red MAGA hats. Now, in my opinion, if you are wearing a red MAGA hat and putting in your social media post #Trump 2024, this is clearly political activity. Her profile page says she's a college deputy director at Turning Point USA, which is not supposed to do any political activity. So is this senior manager being paid, and where is that money coming from? Because it does not look like it was reported as political activity on the 990 form. Here's a screenshot from an interview with Tyler Boyer. This looks like he is sitting at his desk at home. You can see behind his head a poster that reads, "Knock doors, win elections." It looks like it is talking about the Chase the Vote initiative. It's on the wall right behind his desk. For something so important that Tyler Boyer keeps it right behind his desk, does it make sense to you that political activity only makes up 3% of the budget of Turning Point Action. Here's a post from Matthew Martinez that says, "From chasing every vote to curing every ballot. Tonight, TP Action called thousands of voters to help them cure their rejected ballots. We are laser focused on chasing and curing every vote until polls close here in Wisconsin." On his profile, he lists Turning Point Action. I don't know if he works for them, but it certainly looks like he's getting paid. This is a post by Jeanette Garcia. Some people stack paper, TP Action stacks paper. And she's holding a pile of request forms for early voting. Her profile says she's the CTV Deputy Director for Turning Point Action. How much is she getting paid? She also posted this: "Meeting today with TP Action. Chase the Vote senior managers and getting prepared to take on 2026. And there are all these people. How much money are these people getting paid? We know they are getting paid because we have a job posting. Now hiring Chase the Vote managers in New Hampshire. Visit tpaction.com/careers. They are hiring vote managers and paying them." Here's another advertisement. If you live in South Phoenix, Laveen, or downtown Phoenix, Turning Point is hiring door knockers. Ballot chasing representative, positions available now. So it's not just the managers they're paying, they are paying the people knocking on the doors. By the way, the person who posted this is Tatiana Pena, who is one of the candidates who paid money to the UPS Store mailbox for 110 LLC. This is a post from Justine Wadzak, who is another politician who paid money to the UPS Store mailbox for 110 LLC. This is wild. This is a series of photos. Here is Justine wearing a MAGA hat. She is standing over the shoulder of a voter watching him fill in the voting form. She makes sure he fills in the bubble that she wants, and then walks the voter out to the mailbox to make sure he puts it in the mail. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't this look like voter intimidation? I did not know this was legal in the United States. How can you look over someone's shoulder while they are voting? This is not just door knocking. This is not just talking about a candidate. This goes so much further. And also, this is extremely partisan and should be reported in the financials as political activity. I want to know, how much is this lady getting paid by Turning Point? Because her profile says she is a TP Action CTV leader and her profile photo shows her talking on The Charlie Kirk Show. How much is she getting paid? Here's a post by Sam Kay.
It is currently day 6, knocking doors in Mesa, Arizona for the recall election. It is hot out here. There is not a single cloud in sight. Super bright. But you know what? I am more motivated than ever today because not only did I finally get someone to answer the door, after 4 days of knocking and texting and calling, I don't view this as work. I view this as a privilege.
He says he does not view this as work. Really? How much are you getting paid? His profile says he's a field representative for Turning Point Action. Something else strange. Tyler Boyer is listed on the website of the Arizona Young Republicans as part of the advisory board. What is Tyler Boyer doing hanging out with all these young students? Well, it turns out that he's paying them money. Here's a post by the Arizona Young Republicans. Arizona, let's get Kari Lake across the finish line. We need your help to cure ballots. Sign up with TP Action and help cure ballots. This was replied to by someone that says, "Where you all been? You need to get on board earlier." Arizona Young Republicans replies, "Most of us literally work for TP Action, Trump team, or the campaign. I promise you, we're working LOL." How much money is Tyler Boyer giving to the students at the Arizona Young Republicans? So I have shown you a lot of information of what Turning Point Action is actually doing in real life. I've shown you the photos. I've shown you the law. I've shown you how it does not match what is being reported to the IRS. To finish this audit, you need to answer 2 questions. Does Turning Point Action's activity qualify as political activity? And second, does it seem like that political activity exceeds the 3% reported to the IRS on the 990 form? In my opinion, I think Absolutely yes, that they are lying to the IRS. What they are doing is so extreme on such a massive scale with millions of dollars. I think someone is lying. Now, for some reason, if you're still not convinced, do you remember last week when Turning Point's lawyer sent me a threatening letter? That was one of the worst mistakes that Turning Point has done. That letter is the key to this entire story. Because in that letter, they write out their official reason why Turning Point Action's budget increased from $10.7 million in FY23 to $27.2 million in FY24. This increase of $16.5 million was for, and I quote, lobbying and political activity during election years. This is what Turning Point's own lawyer is saying this $16.5 million is being used for. So why is none of this money being reported on Schedule C in the 990 form? According to Turning Point's own official statement, they are guilty. Now I realize we're not doing a real audit here. We do not have access to all the financial information. It is possible that Turning Point has an innocent explanation for all of this. But from what little information we do have, it certainly looks like something illegal is going on. But here's the crazy part. Turning Point Action is not even my biggest concern. The biggest problem is America's Turning Point, that strange 501c3 managed by Tyler Boyer. It is managed by the same person who manages the election-focused organizations Turning Point Action and Turning Point PAC. But we are supposed to believe that it is a 501c3 that does absolutely no political activity whatsoever. Well, we have already seen the types of things that Turning Point is not counting as political activity. With everything that I have shown you about Tyler Boyer and his operations, how many of you believe that America's Turning Point is doing nothing political? The letter I received last week from Turning Point's lawyer revealed the bombshell news that America's Turning Point was missing employees on its 990 forms. A lot of employees. It was around 80 employees that were not reported. So now we know these people exist. The obvious question now is, who are these people? What were these people doing? One explanation could be door knockers. Of course, if those door knockers were wearing MAGA hats, that would make them political, which would make them illegal under a 501c3. America's Turning Point also does not get donations. It gets all of its revenue by transferring money out of Turning Point USA. I mentioned before, in FY24, $8.6 million was transferred from Turning Point USA to America's Turning Point. So let me tell you what I think is going on. Tyler Boyer manages these political companies. The Trump election is coming up in 2024. Tyler Boyer realizes he needs more people to do ballot harvesting. So he decides, let's just steal the donations from Charlie Kirk's Turning Point USA. So he transfers $8.6 million into the company he manages, America's Turning Point. And then he hires a bunch of people for illegal political activity. And he tells everyone, come on, no one will ever know. Charlie Kirk doesn't even have to know. We will just say it is nonpartisan. We will call it get out the vote efforts. No one's ever going to ask questions. No one will ever look at the photographs. Don't worry about it. Except I think that Charlie Kirk found out. This fits the timeline of the Baker-Tilly audit that concluded on June 20th, 2025, that would have revealed all this information to Charlie Kirk shortly before his murder. If all of these people getting paid from America's Turning Point are not doing political activity, then what are they doing? In none of the photos I have seen is there anything that would qualify as non-political activity. So what are they doing? In my opinion, this looks blatantly illegal. It looks like they are stealing donations and using them for something different than what they promised the donors. What they are allegedly using it for is illegal activity. This is why the letter with Donald Trump's alleged handwriting is so important. It looks like they stole the money to use on Donald Trump's campaign. And now Donald Trump himself could be involved in an attempt to cover up the fraud at Turning Point, the same fraud that he himself benefited from. Is this how Donald Trump is planning for Republicans to win the midterm elections? This week, Candace Owens broke a shocking news story.
Think about the size and scale of the event that they put on at Charlie's Memorial Service. They had AmFest. They had a huge donor thing at Mar-a-Lago. So everyone's been killing themselves and no one's getting raises and bonuses. And yet, according to this person, Turning Point USA has brought in $250 million since Charlie's assassination.
$250 million. Are the Turning Point executives planning on stealing those donations and using those funds illegally for political activity? Because that is what it looks like. I'm a conservative, and I do not want the Republicans to win the midterms if they're planning on doing it by breaking the law. If we have to choose between winning and doing the right thing, we need to decide to do the right thing. Come on. No reasonable person thinks that Turning Point Action was only spending 3% of their budget on political activity. They should not be stealing donations in order to win. The ends do not justify the means. I want to emphasize that this is not a theoretical discussion about the tax code. Turning Point is hurting people. They are destroying people's lives. I've talked before about Julie Spilsbury. What Turning Point did to her was disgusting. This was a city councilwoman, a fellow Republican, and Turning Point orchestrated a recall election in the middle of her term because she would not vote how they told her to vote. They're not recalling Democrats. This is what they're doing to Republicans. Here's the photo I showed earlier of Turning Point's shady election practices. This is how they destroyed the life of Julie Spilsbury. And it looks like they did it by violating the tax code. Baker Tilly is the accounting firm that has been performing the annual financial audit for Turning Point. They say there is nothing wrong with the financials at Turning Point. I have to ask Baker Tilly, when you were doing the audit, did you look around at what the company was actually doing in real life? Because I can send you all the photos we were looking at. We have all seen the video of Erica Kirk's endorsement of J.D. Vance. I want to know what specific audit procedure you did to make sure that they are not engaged in any political activity within their 501c3 organizations. Because the evidence to me seems like it would be incredibly obvious. If Baker Tilly overlooked these problems, they can also be criminally charged. Remember what happened with Steve Bannon. He had a nonprofit where he was trying to raise money to build the wall at the border. He and his entire leadership team was charged with fraud because they were accused of using funds for a different purpose than they promised donors. Now, I have a whole separate video going over Steve Bannon's case, and I think that what happened to him was unfair and he should never have been prosecuted. But they were prosecuted, and 3 executives went to prison. The only reason Steve Bannon didn't go to prison was that he took a deal where he pled guilty. So if we were to apply that same standard to the case I have laid out against Turning Point, the entire leadership team would go straight to prison. Tyler Boyer, prison. The CFO, Justin Olson, prison. Andrew Colvett, prison. Blake Neff, prison. Anyone who knew about the political activity and was involved in the cover-up would go to prison. And yes, that includes Erica Kirk, whose name is on the letter with Donald Trump's alleged handwriting. Donald Trump, who talks all the time about election integrity, apparently does not care about election-related fraud when it deals with his friends. I am angry. I believed Donald Trump when he said that the Democrats were cheating in the elections.
There was a rigged election. Everybody now knows that. They found out. People will soon be prosecuted for what they did. It's probably breaking news, but it should be. It was a rigged election. Can't have rigged elections.
But doesn't this make him a hypocrite? How can he talk about election integrity and then help to cover up what Turning Point is doing? If I were Steve Bannon, I would be so angry. Steve Bannon's life was destroyed over his nonprofit. And what these people at Turning Point are doing is allegedly so much worse. And they're not even getting a slap on the wrist. This is so unjust and so unfair. I think it is time for law enforcement to start taking action. Chris Mays is Arizona's Attorney General. Since I've been talking about these issues, she has done nothing. Chris Mays, I don't know how much more evidence I have to show you before you order a police raid on the offices of Turning Point. I've done all your work for you. All you have to do is walk into court and play my videos. I've reached out to Turning Point for comment. They've not responded with answers to any of my questions as of the time this video was posted. Now, if you watch my channel, you know that I like to be fair and balanced. So I think we should bring in our favorite attorney, Robert Barnes, to give Turning Point's side of the argument about what is going on.
What should people know ultimately about the claims like people with Wolves and Finance and all the claims and allegations of impropriety when it comes to their funds in general? And then, what would you like them to know about TPUSA when it comes to, their finances?
So there was nothing wrong at all with any aspect of TPUSA's finances. They were clearly complied with tax law. There was no fraud there, no evidence of any fraud there, misappropriation of any kind there. Charlie didn't suspect any kind of misappropriation. He always wanted to act at maximum efficiency. He was the most efficient operator under the most scrutiny of any NGO in the last half century. I mean, so he was very disciplined about that. All the accusations are false. There's no proof to them whatsoever. If you look at the 990 forms, they completely comply with existing tax law. That's why you've seen nobody, like people on the left that hate Turning Point, they haven't come out and made any of these claims because nobody who understands tax law could credibly say anything bad about their tax returns. And
I had thought about that. That would have been red meat for the left, and I hadn't seen them act on that at all. And that is a really good point on that.
How does he know this? How does he know the accounting records of Turning Point so well that he can say there are no problems with the finances of Turning Point? How does he know this? He has no evidence. He says, just trust me, guys. There's nothing wrong here. Keep in mind that this conversation was happening on a podcast called Paramount Tactical, who recently accidentally leaked text messages he received from Andrew Colvett. This suggests that Paramount Tactical is really just propaganda for Turning Point. And then he goes on.
And I think Candace had some other ambitions with Charlie all the way back that she was disappointed by and things that happened. I think there's maybe more reasons she's anti-Erica than people know about, but I'll leave that as is for now. But Charlie was one of the great Americans, and we dishonor and disrespect his legacy and his life by letting Candace Owens spread false conspiracies that could let his murderer walk free. She has all the fingerprints of a psyop. Do you know what I mean? And then you look at, she's married to the son of a British lord. You know what I mean? If I'm looking for unusual connections, it ain't in Erica Kirk's family. It's who Candace is married to. There's all kinds of issues there. She was known as Queen Candace all the way back to CPAC. I remember 2018. All the other conservatives called her Queen Candace because that was her mindset already. So the idea that we're going to let this queen, I call her the Queen of QAnon now. She's just QAnon part 2.
Okay, now he's just making up random stuff. He's just making stuff up. And this is the guy who's accusing me of misleading people. I've got to say that he's starting to lose his likability. The way Turning Point is acting reminds me of the mob. And if you think about the biggest convictions of mobsters in the US, they were not convicted of murder. Al Capone was sentenced to 11 years in prison for tax evasion. Mickey Cohen was convicted of tax evasion twice. Frank Costello was convicted of tax evasion and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Enoch Nucky Johnson was convicted of tax evasion and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Waxy Gordon was convicted of tax evasion and sentenced to 10 years in prison. These people were not convicted of murder, violence, trafficking, or money laundering. They were sent to prison for tax fraud. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think that Turning Point is committing fraud? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you like this video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future videos. If you want to support independent journalism like this channel, consider signing up for a membership on my website, wolvesandfinance.com. For $6 a month, your support helps me to keep making these videos. Thank you to everyone who has signed up. I'm Zach from Wolves and Finance. Thank you for watching.